Ladies and gentlemen, today I am brought in part by Lida. Now, this is somebody, is it Lida or Lida? Let me get it right.
Lida.
Lida, okay, so I did get it correct. So this is somebody who has been highly recommended to me in my comments, and I do a lot of Reddit. If you watch me fairly often, which I look through a lot of the Reddit stuff for latest news, etc., and you are very well liked over there because I want to tell you, I've watched only a few of the videos, to be fair. I haven't watched all of them, but I've watched a few of them, and the stuff I saw seemed like you'd go fairly in-depth on the factual information, so I want to tell you first and foremost, your content seems pretty nice, and the people like you, so I'm glad to have you on the video today. Welcome.
Thanks. I appreciate being here, and I'm glad to hear all the things that people have said. I do cover a wide range of content, and I do try to be in-depth. That's kind of what I enjoy.
Great. Well, pleasure to have you on for today, because today's topic is one that we've mutually agreed upon, which is looking at the game from both sides of the coin, from both a WoW perspective as well as a free-to-play perspective. Now, before we started recording, you were telling me that you also have, if I understand this correctly, you have a free-to-play character as well, right?
I do. For content, I mainly focus on PvP because I just don't have enough time to capture all of the PvE content on free-to-play as well, and I feel like that's fairly well covered by other content creators.
Sure.
So I focus on PvP, and the reason for that is because the builds are different, and what works for a whale or free-to-play is vastly different.
So I want to ask you and kind of surmise this question to you right off the bat, which is, do you think this game, with PvP aside, we'll talk about PvP in its own unique thing, because I think you would more than likely agree PvP is kind of different from the rest of the game. Would you think the majority of the game is something that you can play from a free-to-play perspective, since you've done both? How far have you gotten in your free-to-play is probably a good way to ask that.
My free-to-play does well, and it's very casual. I probably play the character. I log in and do the bare minimum for dailies, basically 2 bounties, the Ivans, shadow contract, things of that effect. I won't go through them all, but I essentially do very minimal, and then I log out, and I do that 5 out of 7 days, basically, 7 if I can. But the primary focus for me is always my main character, and even by doing that, I've kept up with server Paragon.
Oh wow!
And on top of that, I'm actually capable of doing the H7 raids. I can't do the H8 raid, but I can do the H7 and survive them. I'm certainly not the largest contributor in them, but my character contributes, and that makes it seem and feel worthwhile.
Have you felt like you've been able to contribute not only in the raids, but when you're in like the overworld, the dungeons, etc.? Do you really feel that big lack of resonance? Because what's the difference in resonance? Let's say, what's your main account's resonance that you're used to playing on?
7,000, and the alt is 700. So at this point, 700 resonance for free to play is kind of below average.
That's true. I've seen a lot of people that were saying they've been at like 1,200, 1,300. I've even seen a person that said they made it to 2,200 essence free to play. Do you have any hand on the pulse of where you think people that they've been playing free to play, grinding the whole time, where do you think they could actually be in terms of resonance right about now?
I think from what I understand, about 1,300 is fairly typical if somebody's highly active and not doing anything abusive in terms of farming regular gems or really going to an extreme with multiple accounts.
And in PvP in particular, are you doing any free-to-play PvP as well, or are you just kind of sticking primarily to the PvE side of things on your free-to-play account?
I do PvP, and that's what I show in the videos that I have for that character. I do a different class each season that I can, and I've had to skip a couple of seasons just to collect essences and make it viable. But I pick a different class, and I show the climb to legend with a positive win rate each season to show that it's possible for anybody, even if you play the character less than average or without playing it daily like I do with mine.
So do you think that resonance isn't typically in PvP as big of a deal then? I mean, I know I myself have had an opinion where it's resonance can feel extremely oppressive. It's possible to win with the win rate you're saying, but does it feel good while doing it, or is it you pretty much you go in, you're getting one shot and you're having to maintain CC? What's kind of your method to feel like, one, you're having a good time in PvP, and two, being able to be efficient, which it sounds like you're actually having a positive win rate?
Yeah, I would say it can certainly feel oppressive at times, depending on the matchmaking. And at the moment of this video, the matchmaking is probably more loose than it's ever been for other factors. But with a free-to-play PvP character, there's really no way around anything other than catering it to things like CC or support. And a wizard, for example, a battle mage free-to-play wizard is not going to do as well as, say, a freeze beam wizard.
Sure.
And as long as you're comfortable with playing builds like that in order to be successful, you can have that success, but it feels a lot more limited to me. And I guess that's my biggest dislike about it, is that there's a lack of build diversity for free-to-play PvP. You're really pigeonholed into only what's effective, or your win rate will definitely suffer.
So if you had to have one change for free-to-play PvP, would you take the fact that resonance isn't in PvP? Would you make it where free-to-play has a way to get resonance more often? What would you give to the PvP in order to make it more viable for free-to-play if you could? What do you think the most important change would be?
I actually think it's secondary stats.
Okay.
The resonance will obviously scale the health and damage, and that's a large factor, but secondary stats, are not very well known, and their effect is even less known. But in short, a player who spends a lot of money can really rack up high secondary stats, making your CC on them do very little. They'll be stunned for a very brief period of time. You'll get things like Seeping Bile put on you for sometimes 30 seconds, and it can proc off of itself for other abilities. And that is really unenjoyable for me when I'm on my free-to-play character, and I assume for others. Having a skill on your loadout that's a stun and not stunning somebody is frustrating. And being the target of something like a damage over time effect that will take you from 100% to 0 makes it kind of unplayable.
So when you're on the other side of the coin, then, since that's sort of the topic of this video, when you are on the well, are you looking to do the same thing and stack the secondaries to a point where you know people are not able to keep up with those secondaries to get the benefits of it?
Yeah, my other character is beefy. There's no denying that. And the secondary stats are high. I have over 10,000 combined secondary stats between armor pen, resistance, and potency. And there's certain thresholds that make the stats kind of make or break because of the limitations in terms of gem sockets. So between Ivan's having essentially a cap of how quickly you can level it up and the number of gem sockets, your secondary stats can kind of only be at a certain point at any given time. So there's kind of common areas, and right now 3,000 is a popular number for potency and resistance. So if you have over 3,000 potency, you will be highly effective against most players, and there are some exceptions. And if you have over 3,000 resistance, you won't be very susceptible to harmful effects from other players as well.
Okay. So my next question for you then is, since you kind of seem like an expert in the PvP stuff more so than I have the information available, so I'm kind of curious on where you think the Essence Mastery system has left the PvP then. In particular, for the focus of this conversation, let's ask the question, this as free-to-play versus a well, do you think the Essence Mastery made free-to-play more viable or made the well stronger? Out of those two, what do you think?
It made the well stronger, and resonance scales with the Essence Mastery, and there's a damage calculation in the game, and I'll keep it as brief as I can here.
Sure, yeah.
There's 4 factors essentially, and one is something like the legendary bonuses, like Scorch does 10% more damage. The next thing is your resonance and gems like Berserker's Eye adding damage. There's faction badges, which adds damage, and then there's a 4th category, which includes specific legendary items like in Empathy's Blessing from monks, and that is separate from other categories. But what has happened with the Essence Extraction is it's buffed the category of legendary items, and the items within one category work additively, and items across categories work multiplicatively. So when we add numbers into the first category that later gets multiplied by the resonance category, the more resonance you have, the more benefit you're getting from this, and it's actually made the gap larger.
So the gap has increased between free-to-play and well, you would say. However, in PvE, do you believe it would be the same? I know PvE isn't really as competitive, and you're mostly a PvP-focused guy, but do you believe in PvE it sort of increased the gap the same because of the way that the additives and multiplicatives work? Or is it the type of situation where it's like maybe there's some builds that are now available due to the skill cooldown reduction, etc., that weren't necessarily as available for free-to-play before because they didn't have some of the gems? For instance, I'm thinking Bottled Hope that has skill cooldown reduction. Is there anything in there that you think the free-to-play really can be excited by?
I actually think that the gap is reduced for PvE.
Okay.
Because the mob health hasn't changed and the combat rating requirements haven't changed. So since everybody across the board has gained additional damage, free-to-play is actually clearing faster than before.
Oh, that's a fantastic point. So essentially you're saying because there's just a level in which you have to attain, and once you're at that level, you're just kind of one-shotting the waves, everyone getting stronger, sort of a high tides raises all boats type of situation, if I understand you correctly.
Yeah, more damage, there's cooldown reduction, everything. So it's kind of a better experience for everybody, and in particular, free-to-play, which was having notably slower clears, it's a nice change.
Now, one other question I wanted to ask you about free-to-play, since you've gotten farther than I have in free-to-play, is in these hell difficulties where there's hell 1, hell 2, etc., and now you have to go and you clear through these bosses in order to unlock the other hell difficulties. This is different than the way it used to work before. Do you think this change has had any impact on free-to-play? Because I've got a few comments where it's like, hey, now I have to beat these bosses, and I don't have a warband team, and I can't do it solo, etc., etc. I haven't really seen much of a change because I feel like you can just join one, clear it once, going into the next hell difficulty. But do you have any opinion on the change to the raids as far as free-to-play goes? I know we have the demonic remains now as well. I know these are more RNG heavy and can roll triple stats, etc. So what's your take on that change?
Unfortunately, I haven't had much experience with that. My server has been very generous with doing raid clears. So typically when people ask for them or need something unlocked, they pretty much get the help. And that's nice to see. But I unfortunately don't have much to say or add about that.
Sure, that's no problem. So then as far as free-to-play versus WoW goes, is there any other points that you really want to make in terms of free-to-play trying to get not necessarily as strong as WoW, but sort of to try to be as competitive? I know you mentioned in PvP in particular, you have to sort of focus on certain builds. Would that be your primary advice then, that don't try to be the guy outputting as much damage, but focus on what you can contribute? Or
unfortunately, that's kind of the most efficient way. And I wish it wasn't the case, because I wish that the build diversity existed for everybody. And I think in order to be successful, you kind of are funneled into certain builds as free-to-play, and that's unfortunate in my opinion. The concern I have between free-to-play and spenders is with the new content coming in regards to warbands. If warbands continue to be such a crucial focal point of the game, they're going to become more exclusive, and I think that's a negative impact on the game.
Are you concerned about, because I think that's actually a pretty good point, when the warband system came out and we were looking at things like ancestral property, some of my feedback and concerns about this were, well, this is something that you cannot effectively grind. This is a time-gated thing, and anything that's time-gated, especially in a combat rating type of system, typically means that, okay, if they come out with new combat rating where, hey, you have to have X amount of combat rating in order to clear it effectively, and you haven't been in the game long enough, let's just say a new player, because I mostly think about new players. So let's say you've been in the game a month, you're just not going to have the grind capability due to the fact that there's a cap on this in order to have enough combat rating to do some of this content. If you experience any of that as free to play, where you're finding there's a gap in time relegated type of activities?
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree with that more. I think it's a large deterrent for a new player or a casual player to have these systems, because there's really no catch-up mechanic. And if you weren't playing when the tableau got released, you're essentially behind.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it too. And I know you mentioned in terms of balancing, I wanted to ask you this also. Do you feel there's some classes that are in particular stronger for free to play than other, or can you kind of play almost any class around free to play and still feel like you're contributing? Let's say in particular in PvP, because I know that's where you're specialized in.
In regards to PvP, I think that Necro is hands down the strongest class. You'll be forced into a CC support role, but you are capable of actually getting into the whale bracket, the largest whale bracket, as 100% free to play. You can be sub 1,000 resonance and play with 7,000 resonance player if you perform well enough.
So Necromancer be your number one then? Do you think there's a fairly large gap between number one and number two?
I do. Barbarian is also strong, and the reason is Undying Rage. There's no amount of damage you can do to kill the Barbarian while Undying Rage is active, so it kind of always preserves their longevity and allows them to have control over objective or stalling and things to that nature.
And if you had one thing that you could say to Blizzard in terms of a balance change you would really like to see?
Tell you the truth, I don't know if there's a blanket that would cover everything, but
Sure.
as you mentioned, I am a PvP focused player, although I do lots of PvE as well. One thing I would like to see is just some normalized PvP modes. Even though I have a whale character, I would like to play that character on a normalized level and compete
Amen.
with everybody, not just the people that I play with daily, because in kind of the highest whale bracket, we essentially play with the same players all the time.
Yeah.
And there's no giant pool that we're playing with a variety of people. We see the same people with the same builds. And as much as I like these people and enjoy playing, it would just be nice to play the game with all the other people that are playing as well.
I completely agree with that. And it would also be nice. I mean, unfortunately, I'm not quite as strong as you are, but I've absolutely welled in this game and spent thousands of dollars. And it's unfortunate that while I'm decently strong, I can't remove that and then have I don't want to say like a skill ranking or something, but like you're saying, there needs to be some way that I can remove my resonance and be able to fight every player in the game and be able to have a larger matchmaking bracket. Because even though I think I'm on one of the more popular servers, it is the same people over and over and over again. I mean, even in my bracket, it's basically the same people over and over and over and over again. And it doesn't really feel like there's much variety. I see the same CC freeze builds, or I see the same monk that's diving doing the same thing every time. And if I had to really change one thing in particular, for me at least, it would be adding more maps. I don't know how we haven't talked really much about the offense and the defense gap and the map issue, etc. But in a lot of these MOBA games, the maps are equally balanced. You can only have one map and it's sort of sandbox. But in this one, I don't know your opinion on this, but my opinion would be that I don't feel like the map is entirely balanced, and the matchmaking itself could be increased maybe by at least having some variety of maps, even if we do still have the resonance in it, so be it. But maybe give us more than just, okay, are you on offense or defense? Do you think it's as bad as people say in terms of the offense defense? You've played more PvP than I have for sure.
It's actually probably worse, because
really,
since the map hasn't changed, the imbalances of the map have actually become exaggerated. When we add in things to the game like ancestral powers with the invocations and the legendary essence extraction system to buff damage, the benefits of being on defense have actually become even more powerful. And the requirement to get 55 kills in a match hasn't changed. And the game is at an all-time high for lethality, which just makes being on defense pretty much indicative of your win rate. And there's a lot of players and classes, most notably of which at high rating would be Demon Hunters. Demon Hunters pretty much have a win rate that almost mirrors the time that they get on offense versus defense. They basically have no influence on the match at high level.
It's kind of because they only really bring damage to the table, if I understand it correctly, right? It's just they do DPS. There doesn't really seem to be a lot of CC.
They bring minimal to the table other than damage, and every class brings large damage now.
All right. Well, I think that other than just on the way out the door, do you have anything that it doesn't have to be in pertaining to this conversation? I know we've kept it fairly constrained to free to play and spending money as well as PvP in particular. But do you have any other points or anything else you want to say to the audience, bring up? I'll give you a moment to kind of stand on the soapbox for a second if you'd like.
Sure. One thing I like to advocate as much as possible is that this is essentially an MMO, and MMOs start slow. And there seems to be a large need from the community to get things very quick and immediate. And I just wish everybody would have some more patience sometimes, because MMOs do start slow. And if you give it time and give the right feedback to the developers, I think we'll be in a good spot.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to brush on that point real too, because honestly, that's kind of at the heart of it. I've done a lot of these mobile games, and the last mobile game I covered, like professionally or whatever you want to call it for work, was Raid Shadow Legends for a while, right? I did that for like 3 or 4 years. And there was one point that we went like 11 months with basically 0 updates, like right at the launch of the game. A lot of these mobile games, their updates are more quick, but they're not as large as what we've been getting. I'm not trying to like shill for the game or anything, but the reality is the updates that we get are fairly common. Like they're more common than I would have thought, and they're more significant than I would have thought. So I'm kind of backing up your point a little bit, which is that even if the game's not what you think it should be right now, hopefully give it some time and it will actually end up getting there. I think a lot of people think that Diablo Immortal is just this temporary cash grab before D4, and it might be a cash grab, but I don't think it's going to I don't think they're immediately going to die out with it. Like, I think they actually are committed. And from the Blizzard team that I've talked to, at least the North America team, because obviously I have no communication with NetEase or any of the Chinese people, they seem very committed to the project, and they actually seem like they care, which is kind of cool and kind of counter to what the public opinion seems to think. But I guess I have a little bit of faith that hopefully eventually the game's going to get to where we want it to be. If I had to ask for a change, it'd be Resonance is easier to grind. I know that made a lot of the people in my team disappointed when we found out that Resonance is a fairly difficult grind. You know, as you say, most free-to-play are 12 or 1,300 at this point. That's probably one of the larger disappointing factors. But I do agree that it's an MMO, and after some time, hopefully the game's going to continue to get better. Well, Lida, it's been a pleasure having you. If anyone has not seen his content yet, please do go subscribe. I'll have a link down in the pinned comment as well as the description. This is Lida here. And thanks so much for your content, coming on the channel, sharing some high-level insight that, you know, I'm not the PvP god that I once was, so it's always great to have somebody that has some more experience than I do in that area.
It was a pleasure. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this as well, and appreciate everything you do for the community. Thank you.
Of course, no problem. All right, bye-bye, everybody.